I was not politically affected by the governor, and the governor understood that. But it was very obvious that that was going to change over time. You had a different governor who didn't respect that distance, and you get an agency, a secretary that really depended on the governor and didn't have any own independent power base. It was going to become political, and it has. And it's gotten very political to this stage. And it really depends. If you've got a governor that's fairly good at conservation issues, you'll be okay. That's not too bad. And you got a governor that doesn't believe in those issues, Katie barred the door. And the door is open. There's absolute control right now in the governor's office. Even some of the most minor decisions, you'll hear staff behind the scenes tell you how we have to run that past the governor on things that never even got run up to the secretary in the days when I was secretary and before. That's the kind of control that takes place. The next one, and I say this, I didn't even want to put that up there, but it's the truth. And I'll show you the reason in a minute. I'll give you all the numbers. DNR, in my mind right now, does not regulate DNR. I remember when I started with the agency in 1970. Does everybody remember the bumper stickers back in 1970? What DNR stood for?
Damn near Russia.
Damn near Russia.
Damn near Russia. That was it. A little bit different today. And I was, one of my lines when I was secretary is, by the time I get done, DNR is going to stand for darn near reasonable. Well, we've gone way past that. It is clearly does not regulate. I'll give you some examples. If you read the paper, you've seen them. This is a report we just put out about a month ago. The last few years, the Wildlife Federation obviously works very hard with many other great statewide and local conservation organizations to get strong environmental policies in the state, strong laws. But we've sort of adopted as one of our jobs as an organization, you can have all the great laws in the world, but if you aren't carrying them out, if you aren't enforcing them, they're pieces of paper with ink on them. That's all they are. So we've really been watching bird dogging to see whether they're doing the job. We put out last few years how many cases get referred for environmental violations to the Department of Natural Resources. It dropped off a cliff about 5 years ago. What happened 5 years ago in the state in terms of administrations tells the story. So we've been doing that, and the answer comes out, well, we're working with people and things are getting better. Okay? Okay. Well, we just came out, and I get this information from DNR staff. We don't have an independent source. When we brought out this data, top administration at DNR says, well, we don't know where that number came from. If they'd gone and looked at their own staff, they'd have found it, because it was given to us. Environmental violation penalties, and these are cases, these are the worst of the worst. Cases that ultimately end up in Attorney General's office. In 2015, the number penalty top for all air, land, air, solid waste, hazardous waste, and water pollution and agricultural violations. The penalty was $306,834. The 10-year average was $2.1 million. That's an 86% reduction from the 10-year average. Just from the past year, it was almost $4 million, or 78% reduction. And literally, the agency said things have gotten better, we're finding less violations, therefore less penalties. I was born during the day, but it wasn't yesterday. And the press doesn't believe it anymore. I mean, they make commentary in the articles about those kinds of numbers and that kind of answer. How many of you get the State Journal? Not too many people, we're a little bit further north. When I woke up, the paper, of course I knew this because I got results yesterday. It was on on a couple of TV stations. Wisconsin State Journal, audit, polluters rarely cited. Now this wasn't a nonprofit organization doing the study. It was the Legislative Audit Bureau.
Wow.
So these are government employees auditing the Department of Natural Resources. If you go online, you can see the full report. There's also a summary. Just do a search for the Wisconsin Legislative Audit Bureau. And I'm starting to read the 124-page report. I read the 4-page summary. And these numbers come from both. If you don't look, you don't find. DNR has standards that have been in place for years on how many facilities get inspected every year, how often a facility gets inspected. And these are for the major municipal and major industrial. There's thousands of municipal and industrial, and this is in the wastewater program, sewage treatment and treatment plants. But these are the larger ones. Think of paper mills, think of your larger cities. The number of inspections that was supposed to be done according to their own standards in terms of major municipal facilities, only 73% are being inspected often, or according to those standards. In terms of industrial, only 51%. In terms of concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, only 48% of the inspections are being done. That's part of the reason why you're finding less violations. And in fact, the paper pointed that out because this is the same reporter that had the excuse given to him when we put out the penalties. Well, we're not finding this, things are getting better. They pointed out in this article, no wonder they're getting better. Okay, what happens when they find the violations? Like these numbers are a little bit depressing. This is what you're going to find out. Now this is from 2005 to 2014. If you look at the data, it wasn't too bad from 2005 to 2010. The number was going down after 2010. What happened around then? It just sort of falls off the charts. There's something called a notice of violation, and Joe would recognize that. It is one of the steps in stepped enforcement, and it is for more significant violations that haven't been cleaned up already. There's thousands of violations that are taken care of by just a wastewater engineer talking to the facility, can you get this done, fix it before next time I come back. And then there's letters of non-compliance, which are, they put it in writing, you got a problem here, take care of it. Pretty friendly letterhead, but it builds a paper record. These are the letters. Some of these are required specifically under the Clean Water Act. It says, do that. You've got a big problem, a significant problem. Here's what you got to do, when you got to do it by, and here's the penalties if you don't. This isn't such a friendly letter. This is not the kind of letter you like to get in the mail every day. And then there's steps after that, enforcement conferences, and then referral. So it's pretty far up. Well, from what this Legislative Audit Bureau did, to their great credit, this took a lot of work. They looked at and found 558 cases DNR had in front of them, which by their own standards would have required the issuance of a notice of violation. Only 33 was a notice of violation issued. That's 5.9%. I found that hard to believe. And I went and looked at the base data. They did a lot of work to find that. Another situation, you may have heard about this. As a result of a citizen petition, there were several citizens and several organizations. We were one of them, but great work done by Midwest Environmental Advocates. It's a public interest law firm. A petition was filed with the US EPA, to the US EPA saying, hey, DNR is not compliant with the Clean Water Act. And US EPA, after a year or two, issued a letter in July of 2011, issued a deficiency letter to the department. After they had researched it, there were actually 75 deficiencies. But in terms of the Clean Water Act program, there were 64 deficiencies in state statutes and administrative rules in DNR's water pollution program. In other words, they were not complying with the Clean Water Act in terms of putting things into place so there'd be enforceable regulations for the dischargers to meet. 5 years later, June of 2016, DNR had only corrected about 33 of the deficiencies. Now, part of the problem was they didn't have the staff to do it. We asked them back in July 2011 to get more staff, ask the legislature for staff to do some of the work so their seasoned employees could fix these. They didn't. So we're still way behind in terms of carrying out this 5-year-old directive from the US EPA. I think this bears the point I tried to make out, or supports the point. We can no longer work, at least currently, hopefully not all too far longer in the future, but we cannot count on our state environmental regulatory agency to backstop and ensure that our regulations are being met, and that in fact our streams, and our air, and our lands are being protected. And I can't cite you specific information on this. I do know that every year DNR is adding more waters to the, it's called the 303B list, which is the federal list that DNR has filed for waters not meeting federal and state water quality standards. But I can tell you just anecdotally, and seeing what's coming from grassroots groups across the state, we're losing ground on water quality in our lakes and streams. And some of us, I mean, the reason I started DNR in '72, I was hired as a permanent employee under the first Clean Water Act, was because you couldn't eat the fish in the Wisconsin River. Great walleye, but they tasted like sulfur. The Fox River, I went to school on the banks of the Fox River at St. Norbert College. The worst thing that could happen to you when you're horsing around college was being thrown in that river. It came out, you were going to be sick one way or another, or a rash. There were no walleye there. Now it's got a world-class walleye fishery. That's because of the Clean Water Act. A lot of these waters got cleaned up, and from the point sources, municipal and industrial. But in terms of contaminated runoff, my judgment is, from what I'm seeing, and I think we need to have maybe more of a statewide look at this by scientists, so we're losing ground in terms of the clarity of our waters and phosphorus runoff and whatever. Agriculture has changed dramatically in the state in the last 30 or 40 years in terms of land use, and that's having an impact. So what is the answer? Well, let me show you some of the examples that are going on. How do you like this lake? How about water skiing this lake?
Long Lake.
Right, Long Lake, Washington County. Now you have one anecdote. On the shores of that lake is a beautiful home built by a gentleman called Frank Wolf from Kenosha County. He and his wife moved up there. He's a blue-collar worker. They sold their place in Kenosha, bought land on the lake to build their retirement home. Avid fishermen. I was out there once, and it was a tour. I went in his house, paneled wall, really looked rustic. On the wall, there were wall hangers like this, bass. I mean, that got my attention, obviously, and Frank and I had something in common. I asked him, Frank, where did you get those? They're all over the place. I said, out there. Well, this is out there now. Street average depth of 14 feet. Now you got spots at about 3 feet. That is very common in central Wisconsin. And our great citizens coalition, the Central Sands Water Action Coalition, has really put this issue on the front page. It's from the Low Plover River to Long Lake to Huron Lake. There's about 20-some streams that are depleted. And 50 lakes that are depleted at different levels. But it's the citizens that raised this issue, forced DNR to at least start some studies, which have taken way too long, and have put this on the screen of the legislature, made it very uncomfortable. They have not crossed the Rubicon yet. They haven't, all of us working with them, have not been able to get the attention fully addressed the way it needs to. But there's a lot more people that know about it, and we're going to eventually win that battle. Now we have an Attorney General just issued a very political opinion, and didn't help us at all statewide on high capacity levels. This battle is far from over. A group called Kewanee Cares. That's from the tab of a gentleman named Chuck Wagner. Chuck is no tree hugger, I can tell you. Very conservative politically. Now he's very active in this group, Kewanee Cares. 1/3 of the wells in Kewanee County are undrinkable because they don't meet standards. Town of Liberty, 50% of the wells you can't drink the water. Think of the economic impact of that. Did you ever try to sell a house when water looks like that? What are the, I love it when people talk about property rights. If your regulator says property rights, these are property rights. This group is having a major impact. DNR was not addressing this problem at all. And they basically said, literally, their press guy said, we are using our full authorities and we can't do anymore. This group, through Midwest Environmental Advocates, petitioned the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the EPA directed DNR, you better do something about this. Well, DNR is finally doing something about it. They put task force together, are coming out with reports this summer. I'm fearful they don't go far enough, but we don't know that yet for sure. But DNR did come up with the idea, hey, we can actually do something about this instead of just applying. It's a land spreading issue of manure. In this area, it's a karst formation, limestone sinkholes with a very, very thin topsoil. It goes down and this has happened, where a farmer will put something down, and 2 weeks later, his neighbor's well is brown. That's the kind of traverse through this limestone karst that takes place. The DNR finally figured, as it knew it had all the time, we can come up with different standards for different soil conditions. And that's what they're doing. Except, at least I've been told, they're talking about voluntary standards. That works. An issue that we have a lot of concern of as sportsmen. I hate putting this picture up. This hurts. Chronic wasting disease. DNR, the last 5 or 6 years, has abandoned any efforts to even slow the spread of chronic wasting disease in the state. Finally, it's been showing up in game farms and Oneida, Clare counties, whatever, and more sportsmen have gone on the bandwagon with us. And talk about Natural Resources Board and what a citizens group can do. DNR was blowing us off for 3 years, appearing before the board. December, we appeared and said, hey, remember the chronic wasting disease plan you put together in 2010, 15-year plan? And I listed some of the things they're not doing any of them. But then I found something in it when I said, by the way, this report said you'll review it and updated every 5 years. And that date was 2015. So the board had a hook, and they directed DNR to update the plan. And that's what's being done. And then you saw the governor came out and said, yeah, we need to update the regulations. Because he saw a parade going down the road, and he decided to get in front of that parade. He knew it had to be updated, so he came up some, they're a little bit weak tea, but there's a process going on. We can get strengthened regulations. Citizen groups, all the groups I talked about, there's many other groups I could have put up there in terms of, and let me just wrap up. There's various kinds of ways you can do it, and I just listed a few. On the ground conservation projects, many people are doing really great on the ground work. Just in terms of sporting organizations. Trout Unlimited, Ducks Unlimited, doing excellent habitat protection work. Environmental groups are doing several cleanup type of projects. Citizen education advocacy, that's what many of you do. This can have an impact, and does have an impact. The broader coalitions you put together, and that's one thing I didn't talk about very much. If you look at our organization, we're an organization of organizations. We have 195 organizations that collaborate. Not every run gun club is going to get excited or put staff into it, but they help us move forward and work together with us, and we can call on them when we need them. By definition, we're a collaborative kind of organization. And many of the other organizations we work with are. We work with many conservation and environmental groups. They aren't our members, but in fact, by banding together, by putting your strength, it was talked about the Pinocchio mine. There were a coalition of groups, obviously being led often by the tribal representatives. Well, we each had strengths. We each had different messages we could bring. My group tends to be fairly conservative, if you look at our demographics. We can approach a certain type of legislator that an environmental group cannot. On the other hand, the converse is true. And we're good at serving grassroots. There were legal organizations. Midwest Environmental Advocates is an example. There were political organizations, the conservation voters. We all worked together and pooled our strengths to accomplish things. That's how you tackle the big issues. So collaborate, work with groups that may not be your first thought. A religious organization that has very strong religious stewardship values can bring a different dynamic to the discussion. As an example. But work together and continue the work you're doing. The other thing that I have to be careful, because I represent a 501c3 tax exempt organization, so I can't go too much into depth, but elections matter. There's one in 2016. You all are represented by people. Make sure they know your interests and how you perceive they're doing what they're doing in the last budget or will in the next budget. And there's a big one in 2018. Elections matter. We got into this mess because of elections. This is the way to get out of the mess we're in right now. So, thank you very much.